Recording in progress. Hi, I'm Danny, your host here on the Rise Up Odyssey podcast. This is episode negative three and a half or negative three, depending on how long this show goes for. Here is my co host Haley. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about a famous saying that she found while we were Googling for some content because we got really bored today. And it was,
Yeah, so it is honesty is the best policy.
that's a good one. Folks, when did you
Correct.
remember hearing that? I mean, Haley, when did you remember hearing that as a kid?
What?
Honesty being the best policy.
I don't think I ever heard that specifically.
Really? Okay. I've definitely heard
No.
that specifically when I was a kid. I didn't abide by it by any means, until probably the last 5 years or so. But I would say I heard it a ton in grade school and stuff like that. But you actually
Oh,
lived by it.
yeah, I was told not to lie my whole life. That was something that was very known in our household. So I've always tried to tell the truth. I mean, like sometimes there's some gray area, but I would say 90% of the time, I'm going to be honest because I've realized that gets you further in life than dishonesty.
I would agree with that. After living my life pretty honestly, I would say for the last 2, 3 years specifically, I don't think I've told a lie, or if I have, I've apologized for it and then told the truth. Um, I would say it is a very different way of living your life. I very much saw you doing that, living honestly, and that's when I started to just live honestly. But I think, as you said, there's some gray areas here. So, for example, embellishment. If you're telling a story and you say without thinking, oh, I just beat up this guy. He was 250 pounds, but he was really only 100 pounds or 150 pounds. Is that considered lying?
I I would say it's fiction. Uh so if I was questioning your story and I said, "Hey, was he actually what 250 pounds?" and you said, "Oh yeah, for sure." I mean, is that factual?
No.
And how would you know by looking at him?
You get a scale out, you just
I
pull one
I
out of your
mean,
backpack.
I mean, that's the whole thing. You could tell a story however you like, whether it's fiction or fact, but I mean, it depends. Do you know the truth or not? So if you know he weighed 150 and you said he was 250, 300 pounds to make yourself look better, then I think it's dishonesty.
I'd agree with that. Is it dishonesty if you say it that way, or only if you were questioned about the facts of the story? I think that's where the gray area lies.
No, like what I said is it depends. Do you know if it's true or not?
Ah, okay. Or if you're just estimating in your head.
Right.
It's hard to tell some people's weight. Some people are very dense. They could be very skinny, but they could be 200 pounds or 250 or whatever.
Mhm.
So I think it's the
Yeah,
intention behind it.
well, yeah, I mean, the intention behind anything says a lot on dishonesty versus honesty, right? I mean, if you steal a piece of candy and you say you didn't do it, I mean, and the candy's in your pocket, what? How are you going to prove that? Someone else put it there?
Yeah. Yeah, you could say that. Then you'd be lying.
Well, did you pay for it?
In this case, no, if you were stealing
Okay.
it.
Well, I mean, maybe I assumed you stole it, but really you paid for it. I just didn't see you pay for it. I mean, that's the thing. It's
Hmm.
all your perspective on when it becomes the truth and when it becomes a lie.
That's true. It's
It's like
true.
that game. Have you ever played that game? What is it like? Is it two truths and a lie?
Two truths and a lie. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're really good at it, people can't tell which one's which. But if you start exaggerating things more and more, it's going to become, uh, it'll appear less factual, but actually it could be true.
Yeah. I would say every time I played that game at work, because we use that as like fun facts and stuff like that whenever you're introducing yourself or whatever. Like my things that have happened in my life are so out there that nobody really believes them. but they're all the ones that are the craziest were the truths, and then the one that made the most sense was the lie. I think that's the easiest way to win that game.
Well, yeah, because then it's a game. It's not life.
Oh yeah,
But
but it's
I
also
mean,
true.
in your life, have you been dishonest or held a lie for a friend? And when does that become okay or not okay?
Well, I think that's it depends on the outcome of the situation too. I think that telling the truth is sometimes harder than dishonesty for sure, and the outcome sometimes may be worse or maybe worse than you were expecting. But at the end of the day, you feel better and lighter. At least I feel very light now, that like brain wise and mentally, like when I just tell the truth. I don't hold things back from people. I don't try to, embellish things or make people feel better or, you know, I think it's easier to just say what actually happened and deal with the consequences because at the end of the day, it's going to end up being better for everyone.
Will you feel less what we call guilty?
Yes. And guilt and shame, I think, are at the bottom of the emotional chart, right?
Uh, I don't have the answer.
Okay.
I don't know what chart we're talking about here.
There's
uh,
a emotional frequency chart, and I think that apathy is at the way bottom, and guilt, shame, anger, and it goes further and further from there up until peace and enlightenment.
I would say guilt for sure is probably wherever you're saying on that chart.
Yes.
Shame might be a little bit of a different ballpark. Depends.
I think guilt and shame are like right next to each other. I can't remember which one offhand is up above the other, but I do remember
Well,
that guilt and shame are at the bottom.
would there ever be a point where guilt or shame is a positive experience in life?
If it causes you to make positive changes, I would say so. But I think living with guilt and shame constantly ruins your life. That's kind of how I used to live my life. And so I know from
What's
experience that it kind of takes you over. It makes you apathetic. It makes you not want to do anything.
How would you define both words like in your life?
I would say guilt is I knew I shouldn't have done something and I still did it. And now I feel guilty for doing it. And shame would be the cause of that guilt. Like because I feel so guilty, now I feel so much shame behind it. If that makes sense.
I think so. So where does dishonesty fall into that too? Wouldn't it be in kind of the same bubble?
I would say so. I'd say dishonesty would cause you to feel guilty, which then you'd feel ashamed of yourself.
So it's like a trickle effect.
Yes. Oh, I see what you did there. Yeah.
It's all intertwined.
Yes. So telling the truth is always the better option. Um,
Hmm. Okay.
Growing up, I know you said it was definitely like a core value in your household. And I would say that it wasn't as big in mine. Lying was very much commonplace, embellishing was very much commonplace. All the people I really grew up with were just constantly lying because it was just the way that we knew to get whatever we wanted, you know? Hey, how'd you do on that report card? Oh, I got all A's. And then you just forge your parent's signature, you know? At least that's
Right,
what we did.
but eventually those repercussions come back to haunt you.
Yeah, oh, 100% they do. And then you realize you shouldn't have done those things and you feel guilty because you did those things. And then you feel ashamed of yourself. And then kind of just end up in that apathetic bubble where you don't want to do anything because you feel very, worthless and you don't feel good about yourself. You don't feel good about the person you are.
Well, is there more to that, such as you become an adult, it starts to become more apparent. Like if other people are being dishonest to you, you realize what you were doing previously. And so you start to have even more guilt. And you start to realize if you would have just told the truth, things would have probably been better off.
Yeah.
Sometimes when the truth comes out later because you think you need to keep this secret for the betterment of whatever you believe to be true, uh, it becomes a bigger issue after you hold it in for so long, right?
I would say so. I have done things such as, claiming friends have OD'd to get out of things I don't want to be involved in, like dinners with, maybe friends, significant others, or weddings. Sorry. Uh, or anything like that. It happens because you just don't want to be there. And the only way to get out of a situation is to claim some crazy extreme thing happened instead of just being honest with the person and saying, hey, I just don't feel good. I'm just going to go home. Or hey, I just don't want to be here. I don't want to be in the company with your particular significant other because this conversation is awful. I don't want to be here. So either
Right,
or.
and we've had these discussions, specifically that example, thank you.
You're welcome.
But and what happens here is you get in these patterns, it becomes a habit, something that you have to be aware of and break, but you can start to tarnish or change relationships with people that you actually might care about. And if you start to do that, you're going to lose trust in that relationship. And once you lose trust, things just kind of unravel.
Yeah. Or the thing that you made up actually happens. Because not shortly after I did that, one of our friends OD'd and died. What was it, January 21? Something like that. Yeah.
Mm.
Kid died. It sucked. And then and then you think about it, you're like, shit, 2 weeks ago I made up this excuse. And then it happened in real life. Maybe I do have the power, and maybe my thoughts become my words, become my actions, or somebody else is listening and things happen. And then you feel more guilt, more shame. And you should have just said, oh, I should have been, maybe if I was honest, that wouldn't have happened to him. Maybe he wouldn't have OD'd. And you start blaming yourself, and then it becomes a cycle.
Right, because once you kind of tell the truth, you do feel better.
100%.
But I think there's a fear of the consequences or the unknown, like everything else in life. And so you lie thinking it's going to have a better outcome when really it can be more harmful than good.
Exactly. And I'm not sure if we touched on this, but withholding information, do you consider that lying?
Example.
Example would be if somebody gave us feedback for this podcast and you asked what the feedback was, would you expect me to tell you everything that they said? Or would you expect me to only tell you the good or bad?
Well, wouldn't you have to weigh the pros and the cons? Like, okay, if I don't say everything right now because maybe the moment's not the right time to say this, but it doesn't mean you're not going to say all of it later. You can choose right now to say what you need to say, but you're not fabricating a story.
Hmm.
It's still very factual. You're like, yeah, they had some feedback on the podcast, but I'd rather chat with you in person or over video tomorrow if that's cool with you. And then if for say I was like, no, just tell me now. Like I just really want to know now. I'm kind of curious and I kind of badger you for the information, then yeah, you probably should just disclose it. Um,
Hmm.
but but I would say it wouldn't be unless it was ill intended.
Hmm. So what if and I know that we're going down this rabbit hole of gray areas, but what
Mhm.
if in that same example you said, okay, I'm just going to tell them later on what my thoughts are, but then or what the feedback was, but then you forget to do so, but there was no ill intention there, then that's okay. But if you specifically don't say it and you know you should, and you have bad intention, then that's dishonesty, right?
If I asked and at the moment you decided not to tell me and we just didn't bring it up again, then I don't think it's a big deal.
Hmm,
But because life goes on,
that's true.
Now, if I was like, "Hey, you're gonna tell me what the feedback was. Can we go over that real quick?" Then sure. Is that kind of what you were asking?
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically, like, what's the intention behind it is what I was asking. Like, if it's good intention behind it, you just, you wanted to wait to say it in person and then you forgot about it. It just happened. Life goes on. But if you don't say it because you know that it's not going to end well and you specifically withhold information, then that's just bad intention, which I would say is dishonest.
I don't know. I mean, this whole conversation's our opinions, right?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Uh, I mean, in this particular case, would it do harm to me or yourself if you didn't say all the information?
I would say yeah, because I would feel bad not being fully honest, because you asked me what was said, and if I don't tell you everything that's said because you asked, then I feel like that's dishonest for me not to tell you.
Right, because you would know that and I would be in the dark. So
Yeah,
I guess it would be how you feel about it.
yeah. So if you feel guilty, there's probably a reason why, and because of that, you probably should tell the truth.
So you like answered your own question, correct?
I think so. Yes, correct.
Good work.
That's what you're here for. Help me answer my own questions.
But yeah.
But no.
I mean, like at my sister's house, she has 3 kids, and when something happens in the house, all 3 of them blame each other because that's what kids do, right? So it's kinda like at what point in life does it become your responsibility to tell the truth and not finger point, as you would say. But yeah, it's kind of entertaining with the kids because you're like, okay, which one did it? And usually you can tell, or they'll tattle on each other, etc. But like I said, at what point do we stop pointing our fingers at other people and just take the repercussions of our actions or what we know, the information, you know?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that once we take that responsibility for ourselves and start telling the truth, we won't be finger pointed because there's no reason to do so. And I think that's a good segue into, a future episode, which will be our self first approach and what we believe with that and our opinions on how that's a better way to live. So you can do good for yourself and that'll be able to allow you to do good for others as well.
Yeah, like take initiative,
Yes.
responsibility, whichever
Take
word we want to use.
responsibility. Yeah, for your life, for your actions, for literally everything. How are you going to do that?
Right, because if you don't, then you're just blaming it on someone else, and how's that gonna get you anywhere except spinning your wheels?
Yep. And then what are you going to end up feeling? Guilt and shame and
Right.
apathy.
So you're being dishonest with yourself, essentially. You're lying to yourself.
Exactly. And there's a good amount of, and there's healthy versions of that if to get yourself to believe you can do something that you don't think you can do. That's the only positive, lying to yourself, but you're not because you then end up accomplishing it. But sometimes things could be a lie and then end up being the truth later on. Like if you say, I'm going to complete this program in 75 days, for example. Well, we don't know if you're going to do that or not because that time hasn't happened yet. So it's not a lie or a truth, or it could be considered a lie because it hasn't happened yet. But then once that time goes by and you accomplish it, then it's the truth.
I don't know if I agree,
Okay. What are your thoughts?
because when I say, "Hey, in 75 days, I'm gonna do all 5 of these tasks every single day for 75 days." Well, at the moment I say that, I think I would believe it to be true.
Hmm.
So if I believe it
Yes.
to be true, then I'm not being dishonest with myself. But it's a matter if I follow through on those actions and if I make it a priority, which is going to go into a whole nother ballpark here of, time management, doing what I say, following
Yes.
through, taking initiative, and it's all freaking circle.
It
I
is.
didn't want to. I didn't want to say the other word, so it's all frickin' circle. And, and that's where it comes down to. It's all about your character, your core values, who you are, how you live your life, what you align with, and that's kind of where we branched off with this dishonesty versus honesty thing, and how living an honest life is probably a core value or a policy that I would hope most would choose to live.
Yes, ideally, we would hope for that. And that's one of our core values is honesty, and that's how we kind of got here. I think all I was saying with that is, let's say you've had empirical evidence that you haven't been able to complete it. Like how many times did I tell you I was going to complete it in 2021 and I failed? Seven, eight, something like that. But every
But
time I believed it to be true, but it didn't happen. So this time around, when I said I'm going to do it, I had to lie to myself a little bit because all the empirical evidence said you're not going to be able to do it. But in my head, I was like, no, I'm going to do it this time. So in my head, I was like, maybe I'm lying to myself until it gets accomplished because each other time I'd done that. That's all I was getting at.
right, but is that dishonesty to yourself, or was that self doubt coming to haunt you because you weren't successful the other times?
I think it was probably a mixture. I think it was dishonesty to myself to get myself to believe that I could do it. And
Hmm.
then I think it was also a mixture of the self doubt for sure, because I had all this evidence that I couldn't in the past.
So I don't know if I would say you believed it to be true when you claimed it. I think it was something you wanted to prove to yourself and something you wanted to accomplish. But I think if you
Hmm.
already went into it with self-doubt, I'm not sure you were lying to yourself because you already knew what happened. It was still factual.
In the past or the successful attempt.
In the past. Now, if if you were like, well, you know, I did 70 days, but I'm going to call it 75.
Okay, that's yes, that is straight lying to yourself. Or if
Or
you go to the next day without completing it, if you're doing it the Andy way and you
wait,
go to the next day
well,
without completing it.
even within your guidelines, because again, there's gray area in Andy's program, as we've
Yes.
mentioned. So as long as you stick to what you set out to do it originally and not make exceptions along the way, I think then you're fine. You're being honest with yourself. But I think when you didn't succeed the times before, you
Mhm.
went into this journey with some self-doubt because that's naturally what's going to happen. But you were like, okay, this time I'm going to do it because of this, this, and this, whatever that might be. But you still never lied to yourself about it. You knew it happened in the past, but you were trying to just overcome that.
Hmm. I just felt at the time that I was maybe lying to myself that I was going to do it. There was many periods and then maybe that's just what the self-doubt was. Um, but until I completed it, then it wasn't a lie anymore. It was the truth because I completed it. That's
And
just where my head
again,
went. It's all our
absolutely.
opinion.
And honesty, I mean, it's how you feel about it. It's how you define it. There are guidelines out there. There's definitions that we could look up and talk about on here. But really, it's at the end of the day, it's what you make it. Um, but I definitely say most of us know what honesty and dishonesty is. The
Oh
like
yeah.
cut and dry version.
Oh yeah. There's right and wrong. You know what's right and wrong empirically and in your body. You know how you feel when you say something that you don't believe, or you know when you're being dishonest with somebody or yourself. There's a feeling there, and there has to be a feeling there because if there wasn't, you'd never know, right?
Right. And do you think it comes down to facts or fiction, kind of like we talked about?
I think there's definitely gray areas like what we talked about earlier, withholding information, embellishment, things like that. But empirically, yeah, I think there is right and wrong, cut and dry. Like this is the truth, this is dishonest. Because you get that feeling in you when you know you're being truthful or you know you're being dishonest.
Right, and I think we could even do a whole episode on fact versus fiction and how that plays a role in our lives too, you know?
Yeah, that might be another future episode.
Is it factual or is it not?
I
And what
guess you'll
kind of
find
story
out.
and what kind of story are you telling yourself?
Exactly.
But yeah. So I guess we're both on the same page here of honesty versus dishonesty. We kind of have the same ideas behind that, uh, but you and I always like to push each other a little bit and question where we're coming from to better understand one another.
And that's what we should always do. I think that's another one of our core values is understanding. Because if you don't know where the other person is coming from, then there's no way of understanding them. You just always could assume bad intentions. But if you take the time and understand where they're coming from, then you realize that most people have good intentions.
Correct. I like to lead with curiosity. That's what I call that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But I think that's a good place to wrap us up for the honesty conversation today. What do you think?
Hopefully it don't go in circles too many times. Just a little bit.
Just a little bit of rambling, but we
A little.
appreciate all of you who have stuck around to the end. Please shoot a comment below if you made it this far. We appreciate you. And that's it. We'll get on to the next one. We'll see you guys. I guess this was -3. So we'll see y'all for -2 and we'll go from there. I'm Danny, your host of the Rise Up Odyssey podcast, signing off.